Hello friends, Mr. Ryan here. Now that we've looked at the organelles of the cell, it's time to look at what's on the outside of the cell. Our key question is, what is the function of the cell membrane? The answer is, the cell membrane regulates what enters and leaves the cell, and it also protects and supports the cell. For example, you have a working factory. It has wall, it has a roof to protect it from the environment outside, and also to serve as a barrier that keeps its products safe and secure until they're ready to be shipped out. The cell membrane works in a similar fashion. Cells are surrounded by a barrier known as the cell membrane. Remember when we talked about things that all cells have, or all cells have to have a cell membrane? Many cells, including prokaryotes, remember those that don't have a nucleus, also produce a strong supporting layer around the membrane known as a cell wall. Now, when we were talking about the difference between a plant cell and an animal cell, we said the plant cell had a cell wall. But it's not just the plant cell that has a cell wall. I'll give you a list of other things that have cell walls. But let's look at this picture. We have a plant cell here. We have the cell wall. Don't forget, we still have the cell membrane. So there's the plant cell with the cell wall. Over here is the bacteria, the prokaryotic cell, which, if you remember, a prokaryotic cell does not have a nucleus. The main function of the cell wall is to provide support and protection for the cell. Prokaryotes, plants, algae, fungi, and many prokaryotes have cell walls. Animals do not have a cell wall. Cell walls lie outside the cell membrane, and most are porous, enough to allow water, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and certain other substances to pass through easily. So the cell wall is porous, and it does let things get through so it can get through the cell membrane and then get inside the cell. Cell membranes. All cells contain a cell membrane that regulates what enters and leaves the cell and also protects and supports the cell. Here is our cell membrane. This says bilayer. That means it has two layers. As you can see here, there's one layer, two layers. This, when you look at this picture of the cell membrane, this is the outside of the cell. This is the inside of the cell. And cells are functioning usually in a liquid environment of water. If you look over here, there's actually a picture of a cell, and you can see the cell membrane. The composition of nearly all cell membrane is a double-layered sheet called a lipid bilayer, which gives the cell membrane a flexible structure and forms a strong barrier between the cell and its surroundings. Again, bilayer. Layer here, layer here. Bi means two. The property of lipids. Good thing we talked about those macromolecules. If you remember, we talked about proteins, carbohydrates, nucleic acids, and lipids. Okay? So this is where our macromolecule lesson is coming to play. Many lipids have only oily, fatty acid chains attached to a chemical group that interact strongly with water. The fatty acid portion of such a lipid is called hydrophobic, or water-hating, while the opposite end of the molecule is hydrophilic, or water-loving. So, the tail, which is made out of the lipids, remember, the cell membrane is a phospholipid, so the phospho part is up here at the head, the lipid part is up here at the tail. So I like to think of it as a beach ball with legs. So, how do you remember? The head, it likes water. Hydro means water. Philic means to love, like the city of Philadelphia is the city of brotherly love. Hydrophobic, hydro means water. Phobic means to be afraid of something. Okay, so if you have a phobia, you're afraid of something. Okay? When such lipids are mixed with water, their hydrophobic fatty acid tails, okay, that's this part here, cluster together, while their hydrophilic heads are attached to water. A lipid bilayer is the result. The head groups of lipids in a bilayer are exposed to the water, while the fatty acid tails form an oily layer inside the membrane, which water is excluded. Most membranes contain protein molecules. There's another macromolecule we talked about. So the cell membranes contain protein molecules that are embedded into the lipid bilayer. Carbohydrates molecules are attached to many of these proteins. So we know this is phospholipid. These things here are proteins. Okay, those structures are made out of protein. So when things are small that can get into the cell, they just diffuse through the cell. But if something big needs to get into the cell, like glucose, it needs help. And we'll talk about this later. It goes through these protein channels. Because the protein embedded in the lipid bilayer can be moved around and float among the lipids, and because so many different kinds of molecules make up the cell membrane, scientists describe the cell membrane as a fluid mosaic. Picture this. Remember I talked about the phospholipid as being a beach ball with legs? Think you have a swimming pool in your backyard or a public swimming pool, and you filled it with beach balls with these ribbons attached to it, the legs. You can just imagine if you put all these beach balls in, how it would look, how it would move, how those beach balls at the top would move. And that's what it would look like, okay? A fluid mosaic model. Some of the proteins form channels and pumps that help to move materials across the membrane, just what I was telling you about. So the proteins helping things get in and out of the cell that are too big, have a certain charge. Many of the carbohydrate molecules act like chemical identification cards, allowing individual cells to identify one another. Although many substances can cross biological membranes, some are too large or too strongly charged to cross the lipid bilayer, just what I mentioned before. If a substance is able to get across a membrane, that membrane is said to be permeable. It lets it in. A membrane is impermeable to substance that cannot pass through it. Most biological membranes are selectively permeable. What does that mean? That means some substance can pass across them, and others cannot. Selectively permeable membranes are also called semi-permeable membrane. That's the end. So you've now gone over the cell organelles, and now you understand about the cell membrane. Thank you, and as always, have fun and enjoy learning.